The Tuscarora Lapidary Society teaches a wide variety of lapidary techniques in its education center in Brookhaven, Pennsylvania. One of the most basic is the making of rounded gemstones called cabochons. This short video shows the equipment that we use in making cabochons and the procedure, from the selection of a piece of rough to the completion of the cabochon. The procedure of making a cabochon is called cabbing, and the resultant gemstone is called a cab for short. Here we have a collection of slabs of jaspers and a piece of petrified coral. The slabs are about 1/4 inch thick. Most people who cut cabochons purchase the rough material as slabs from lapidary dealers. We do cut some of our own slabs from large pieces of rough using large diamond saws called slab saws. Although one can cut free-form cabs, most lapidaries cut symmetrical shapes for which there are a variety of templates. Next, we will draw an outline for a 40 mm by 30 mm oval cab. Then we add straight lines that will guide the saw cutting, in which we will want to come fairly close to our outline while also saving as much material as possible for additional cabs. Lapidary saws seem to have a smooth edge, as you can see on this 8-inch trim saw, but the material near the edge is embedded with diamond grit, small pieces of diamond. Diamonds are regarded as the hardest known material. The diamond grit in the saw blade cuts our softer lapidary material by grinding. That process can generate a lot of heat, as you will see shortly. To keep the rough cool and to keep down dust, the saw blade runs through a container of special cutting oil. Once the trim saw work is done, we do initial cleaning in a box of kitty litter that absorbs a lot of the oil. Any additional oil residue is then washed off using detergent and water. The primary machine we use for making cabochons is the Genie by Diamond Pacific. The wheels of the Genie are 6 inches in diameter. We also have a Diamond Pacific Titan with 8-inch wheels and a lightweight Diamond Pacific Pixie with 4-inch wheels. The 80 and 220 grit wheels are used for basic shaping. They have diamond grit embedded in a metal surface. The 280 grit wheel is used for initial smoothing. It has diamond grit embedded in a flexible material that has a soft sponge rubber backing. The wheels on the right side of the Genie also have flexible surfaces and are used to continue the smoothing process and begin the polishing process. In the initial grinding, we hold the cab in our hands and grind away material to get close to our outline. This process goes fairly rapidly with this piece of jasper, but can be much slower with harder materials. Most cabochons are cut to be set in jewelry, with a bezel pressed against the cab. For a bezel to hold the cabochon shape must angle inwards as one comes up from the back of the cab. A 15-degree bezel angle is perfect for this purpose. Diamond Pacific supplies cab rests for the Genie that enable us to grind that 15-degree angle. When the 15-degree angle is complete, the bottom edge of our material is now quite sharp. That can cause two problems. The sharp edge can chip, but also it can make it difficult to set tightly in a bezel, as there would be no room for the small bead of solder that may be around the bottom of the bezel. So we grind a small 45-degree angle cut that removes that sharp bottom edge and solves both of the problems. That edge is now much more difficult to chip, and it leaves room for the small amount of solder that may be at the bottom of a bezel into which the cab may be set. This small cut is called a chamfer. With the 15-degree bezel angle and chamfer in place, we next clean the piece of rough and add some marking that will aid in the shaping. The first is a line around the stone called the girdle line. Below that line is the 15-degree beveled area against which a bezel would be pressed when setting the cab. That area will be polished, but we do not want to change its shape in the rounding process for the region above the line. A couple ovals are drawn on the top of the rough as guides for rounding the top. The goal is to round the top without grinding away the center. The finished cab should be almost the same thickness as the slab from which we started. We stay away from the center in this rounding process, slowly removing the shoulder and rounding from the girdle line toward the center. One can go through the entire cabbing process holding the rough in one's hands, but it is much easier to attach the rough to a short dowel called a Dop Stick. For that attaching, we use a wax heated in what is called a Dop wax pot. Here we are stirring the wax a little and adding a glob to the end of the Dop Stick. The next short video shows the joining of the Dop Stick and the rough. The rough itself is upside down on a small unit heated by a light bulb, so the rough is hot. Otherwise, the wax would not hold. The wax is shaped around the dop and the back of the rough. The Dop Stick is carefully aligned in the center of the rough and perpendicular to it. After a few minutes, the wax cools and hardens. The 80 grit wheel is used to begin rounding the top. We stay above the girdle line and slowly work toward the center. A good rule is to cut a little and check a lot. One can always remove more material, but you cannot put it back when it's gone. The 220 grit wheel is used to finish the rounded shape and to remove scratches made by the 80 grit wheel. Now the softback wheels come into play. The 280 grit softback wheel will remove small flats left by the hard metal 220 grit wheel and will remove the 220 grit scratches. We continue the smoothing with the 600 grit and then the 1200 grit wheels, each of which removes the scratches from the preceding wheel. The surface looks very good after the 1200 grit wheel. Next, the 3000 grit wheel removes the 1200 grit scratches and gives a good pre-polish. On some of our machines, we use a 14,000 grit wheel at this last stage on the Genie. Many jaspers and agates will yield a very high polish when worked on a rotating, soft-backed, moist piece of leather coated with a solution of cerium oxide. Here we have converted an old Sears Craftsman lapidary unit into a cerium polishing unit by slowing the speed way down. The leather already has the cerium oxide solution on it, but first we need to wet it a little. When the polish looks uniform and very good, the cab is almost done. To remove the cab from the Dop Stick, it is placed into a freezer for 5 minutes. The wax and the cab shrink at different rates when cooling, thereby loosening the cab from the Dop Stick. The wax is then scraped from the back of the cab, and the back is then polished a little on the Genie. This concludes our introduction to making a cabochon. The Tuscarora Lapidary Society teaches many lapidary techniques at our education center in Brookhaven, Pennsylvania, including cabbing, faceting, sphere making, and intarsia, among others. For a complete list and for current classes, please visit our website, www.lapidary.org.